All right, so there's several things we need to do to secure administrative access to our server. The security standard went over what those things that you need to do are, and this is how we're going to do them. First thing you need to do is connect to your server. I am currently connected to the VPN, so I am connected. So I'm going to SSH directly to my system as root. One of the things we have to do is disable root login. But before we can do that, we need to make it so that we have some other user that we can log in as. So I'm going to SSH to my system and log in as root with root's password. And then we need to create a user account. So the way you do that, user add, and then put your username that you want to create. I'm going to be using RBE1111 for this. So that's the command for that. Then you need to give yourself a password. And you can set the password to essentially whatever you want as long as you pick a good one. But I did it as root, so actually it let me do whatever I wanted. So I ignored where it said bad password and typed in another one. So now I have a user on my system called RBE1111, and it has a password. So I'm going to exit out from my root login, and now I'm going to SSH in as my new user. And put the password I just created. And now I'm logged in as my new user. So that's awesome. Except that there are a few other things we need to do before my user will be allowed to get administrative access. So in theory, I could use the switch user command to become root, but it's going to ask me for root's password. I do know root's password, so I could type that. And now I'm root using the switch user command, but that's not really the way most people recommend you do it nowadays. Because you have to share the root password with everyone who needs to become root. And that also means if somebody gets fired or quits, you need to change the root password on all of your systems. So that's generally frowned upon to use the switch user command to become root. So it's much more common for people to use sudo to give out administrative access. So the way sudo works is it switches user and does something. So switch user and do. And lots of times people can use sudo and they can specify the specific command they want to run. Sudo service IP tables restart. This command would restart the firewall. And that would run and it would do it as root. But users have to be permitted to use sudo. And my user has not been permitted to use sudo yet. So I need to go back into my system as root and make my user so it can use sudo. So yeah, so I can use the switch user command. If you put the dash on switch user, that tells it to pick up the root's environment. I almost always use the dash because I want root's environment. What do I mean by environments? Hopefully you remember we have some environment variables. One of them is the path. That's my regular user path. Sometimes root has a different path that has some things you need that the regular user does not have. I don't know if it's going to be any different in this case, but I almost always use the dash. So yeah, so the path is a little different in this case. So yeah, so that doesn't matter for you. Should work either way. So a couple things we need to do to make sudo our user configured to use sudo. One of them is we need to add our user to the wheel group. The wheel group is a special administrative group that lets the user use sudo, and we'll look at why that is in a minute. So the way we can add our user to the wheel group is with the user mod command. If we do a -a, that tells it to append this group to our group list. -G tells it to set it as part of our supplemental groups, I think. And then you put the group name, and then you put the user ID you want to modify. So I ran that command. If I run the ID command, that will tell me about my user. If I run the ID command with RBE1111, that will tell me about my RBE1111 user. So now that user has access to use sudo. So now, if we log out as root and we try to use sudo to do something, we put the password in. This is the regular user password. Oh, and it says I'm not in the sudoers file. But I just told you put me in the wheel group would make it so that it works. Well, a little known fact, I don't know if it's a little known, very confusing fact. When you make changes to a user after it's logged in, it doesn't get those changes until it logs in again. So we look, it says my groups are this, the wheel user, the wheel group is not there. But if we looked up here where I ran it as root, it said the wheel user is there. So anytime you make changes to a user's settings, they need to log out and log back in. So I just logged out. I'm going to log back in. And now I am going to look at my ID for fun. And now we see that I have the wheel group. So now if I try to run some command, it doesn't matter what command I'm running right now. You can run this command to test it. Your IP tables firewall should be running. It's going to ask me for the password for my user. And that wasn't it, so I probably messed that up. And now it still says I'm not in the sudoers file, even though I'm in the wheel group, which is very weird. So now we are going to use the switch user command to become root again with root's password, which is what you set it to at the beginning. And now we are going to look at the sudoers file. This file controls who can use sudo. So we want to find the line for the wheel group. So I'm going to put it, I hit escape, I hit a slash wheel, that does a search. And we come down here and it says, oh, hey, wheel, these are both commented out. So even though the lines are in there, they are not being respected. So we are going to uncomment out one of these lines. Why are there two lines? Well, this line says allows people in group wheel to run all commands. Great. This says same thing without a password. So if you recall, see if I can scroll up. No, scroll up's not working. If you recall, when I ran sudo, it asked me for my password. That's very annoying to me. I don't like asking for my password. So I'm going to do the line that says no password. So that's what you want to do. Save the file. Oh, it says, oh no, read-only option is set. Well, you know what? You are root. Your system does not tell you what you can do. So you put the exclamation point on the end of that. Bam. It lets you save it. So I have put my user in the wheel group. I've modified the sudoers file to allow for the wheel group to run commands. So now if I exit back out and try my sudo command again. All right, so we checked that out. What happened was I ran the command and it worked without asking me to enter the password. So that's what we need to do to configure our user for administrative access. So to summarize, the few ways we can get access to a system with administrative access, we can log in directly, which is frowned upon. We can use the switch user command to become root, which is frowned upon because you have to share the passwords out. And we can use sudo to allow people to do things as roots. One last thing I probably should have told you. I normally don't use sudo and then put commands. I use sudo -s to get myself a root shell. You can also use sudo -i to get yourself a root shell. What's the difference? -i gives you your environment. Oh, the man pages aren't installed. Install. If you want the man pages, you have to install them, which I think I mentioned in the beginning of the learning module. Shouldn't take very long. So if you look at the man pages, it tells you what the different switches mean. So I just talked about the -i and the -s. One of them gives us the user's profile. So -i says simulate initial login. So that gives us the roots environment, and -s says the shell option runs the shell specified, blah blah blah. But you don't get the root initial environment. So the same issue comes up I mentioned with the path variable before if you don't use the s. So I think that is all I needed to cover in this video.